Sexual violence is an age-old crime that can happen to anyone at any age. Today, I speak to a victim of sexual assault. Find out what a local organization is doing to tackle sexual violence and take a look into the controversial Minnesota sex offender program. I'm Brenna Kamal. Our Issues Twin Cities starts now. It was the unthinkable. Over 25 years ago, Stacy's life took a turn she never expected.
I was, at the time, a young mom, a full-time college student, and also worked full-time at a halfway house. And I worked the evening shift, and one of the residents came down in the middle of the night and was having a conversation with me, and then he stood up, closed the door, and proceeded to sexually assault me. I was the only staff person in the house, so nobody else could hear me. So I had to, once it was over, I had to call 911, and the police came.
Since then, what has become of your offender?
He was sentenced to 4 years. He was assessed as being an untreatable sex offender, so he did not receive any treatment. It was just straight prison population. Was released after serving 2/3 of this time. He was considered a high risk for reoffending, so they had him under an intense supervision agent, and that agent kept in touch with me, kept me aware of type of supervision that the predator would be under, and eventually what happened was the offender became aggressive to the supervision agent, and that violated his probation, and he was arrested again. At that time, what they did was they had him go through the process of being committed and assessed as a sexually dangerous personality, and he was committed to St. Peter indefinitely. Since then, about every year, I would get contacted by my advocate, just giving me a status report, that he was still there. He still is a danger, but he's a much older man now, 67, I believe is what he must be now. He was going to be released to a group home that apparently houses sex offenders and is located about 5 miles from where I live.
How do you stay sane with him only being 5 miles away from you?
Probably for the first year, I did a lot of scanning crowds in public places. I did a lot of looking over my shoulder at the local Walmart store, which would be the likely place where a group home would go to get items they needed. I thought about, starting to go across town to use the other Walmart, but I thought, that is giving him continued power over me, which I refused to do. You just learn to use your coping skills and tap into your resiliency and a lot of self-talk that, if I see him, what will I do? Turn and walk the other way.
Sexual violence is widespread. Across the nation, nearly 1 in 5 women have been raped in their lifetime, 1 in 71 men in their lifetime.
What we understand about sexual violence is that it's one of the most underreported crimes that there is.
Jean is the executive director at MinCasa, an organization that is a voice for sexual assault victims. How important is it to be a voice for victims of sexual assault or sexual violence?
We understand that a lot of victims, for a variety of reasons, choose to be very private about this assault, this offense, this violence that's happened to them. And so to have an organization that is there as a voice for victims is really important. And it's important for us to make sure that we are listening to victims and that we are staying in touch with victims and what their needs are, and also staying in touch with what the the research and the best practice tells us about how to work with victims.
How does sexual violence affect a person?
It's going to be very individual. There's been some really important advances in our understanding of that. Some of that has been medical research or psychological research. Children that have experienced child sexual abuse or other adverse childhood experiences have that long-term effect in all areas of their life many times. Not to say that they can't overcome that and become strong and capable, but we do see that their full potential has sometimes been affected.
Sexually abused girls are 3 times more likely to have an emotional or mental health issue lasting more than a year. They are twice as likely to suffer from depression and 3 times more likely to purposely hurt themselves.
We help connect victims to their local advocate in their community. And then the local advocate is really going to be the advocate the person who can help the victim navigate the system, help the victim find help and healing.
As an advocate, Jean has provided Stacy guidance since her incident. How have you worked with her to assist her through her hardship?
Because she did go forward and report the assault to police, I was able to be with her when that assault was reported, and I was able to go to every court hearing with her, or if she chose not to go to the court hearing, I would attend on her behalf and report what had occurred. And so in that way, as an advocate, I guided her through that process.
Having the luxury of having Jean from the beginning until up to even currently has been crucial. She's been a support. She's been one that has been very validating of the experience. She's allowed, especially initially when you feel a lot of shame, she's been able to provide education in terms of this is how, our legal system works. This is how some people who've experienced sexual assault might feel. So there was a lot of normalization of the emotions that I experienced afterwards.
How important is it to address sexual violence as a whole?
If we want to stop sexual violence, we really need to address sexual violence and some of those underlying causes of sexual violence. Because while we see it expressed in lots of different ways, some of the underlying causes are common to sexual violence. And so I think we'll be talking about how we address offenders.
Coming up on Our Issues Twin Cities, the controversy of the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. It was a story that shook the state of Minnesota. On the eve of Thanksgiving in 2003, 22-year-old Drew Shadeen was abducted from a Grand Forks Mall parking lot. After 5 months of investigation and many unpromising leads, Drew's body was found in Crookston, Minnesota. She was raped and brutally murdered by a recently released Level 3 sex offender, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr.
This caused a big political controversy between the Attorney General, Mike Hatch, at the time, and the Governor, Tim Pawlenty, where Hatch blamed Pawlenty for releasing the sex offender from prison.
Eric Janis is the president and dean of William Mitchell College of Law.
Pawlenty reacted, as you would expect, by really clamping down and saying, okay, this is never going to happen again. We're going to increase the number of people that are committed. And so that caused a literal explosion in the number of people who were being locked up after they had served their prison sentences.
The Minnesota Sex Offender Program opened its doors in 1995 in Moose Lake as a high-security treatment program for sex offenders believed to be dangerous or have sexual psychopathic personality traits.
This is a program that's out of control. It is supposed to be a civil commitment program. In my opinion, that's a misuse of civil commitment, and it takes some very basic American principles of law, like we control the power of the government very carefully. We don't let the government take away our liberty unless we've committed a crime and they've charged us with a crime and they've convicted us in front of a jury of our peers. So this Minnesota sex offender program turns all of that on its head, and in that sense it's, in my opinion, un-American.
You have to ask the question, are we really treating anybody? Or is it, in fact, just a program to lock people up because of what they might do in the future?
DFL Representative Tina Liebling is the chair of the Health and Human Services Policy Committee.
This is where the problem comes, because under our Constitution, you can take away somebody's liberty only for certain reasons. This is definitely taking away people's liberty. And some people may say, well, they're just sex offenders, so what? Take away their liberty. But the fact is that we do have a Constitution, and they are still human beings. And so there has to be a process where you only take away somebody's liberty for very good reasons, and you only keep them deprived of their liberty while those good reasons are still there.
The Minnesota Sex Offender Program has faced intense scrutiny after a federal class action lawsuit was filed by the offenders of the program, questioning its constitutionality. Recently, U.S. District Judge Donovan Frank ruled the program unconstitutional in its method of treating offenders.
I believe that the program is constitutional.
Along with Eric and Tina, Representative Nick Zerwas serves on the Sex Offender Civil Committee Advisory Task Force.
He has concerns around the efficiency of the program and the equity in the program. If you read his ruling, some of the things that he states in the ruling were never even entered as part of the court record. It was stuff reported in the media or other kind of one-off instances. The attorneys that I've spoke with believe that it's a case that should be appealed.
I think it's clearly unconstitutional. I've read the judge's order. I think he sets it out very, very clearly. You just can't take away people's liberty when they're not convicted. Remember, these are people who are not under a sentence of conviction. You can't take away somebody's liberty because of what they might do in the future and not even be having a real treatment program where they have a real possibility of release.
Bottom line is, for victims, we have to have a system that works, right? And so when we talk about working with the partners in the criminal justice system around the investigation of and prosecution of sexual violence, the system needs to work at that point. There's only the smallest number of offenders who are in this Minnesota sex offender program when we consider all of the sex offenders out there. So there's a lot of focus on these small number of offenders.
Today, there are currently over 700 people in the program. Why have only 2 people been successfully released?
The reason so few have been released is directly as a result of the leadership orders. I'm talking about the governors, basically saying we're not going to release people. And that comes again out of this political fear that if someone is released, that will cause a huge community backlash, and that will be harmful politically for that for the politician.
The public is very much afraid of people in there. It's been sort of explained as being the worst of the worst in this program. That is a really questionable assertion, that these are really the worst of the worst. I'm sure some of them are. But the problem is that the 700 people are not all the same. There's a vast difference between many of them.
One of the key problems of the case is the assessment of the individuals in the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. In Minnesota, there is no requirement in law to regularly review an offender's case. How has that affected the program?
If you can think about this, somebody's put into the program for treatment, say they're getting treatment, but they are never entitled to get a review to see if the treatment is working.
Staff tell us that those that are eligible and are working the program are working very closely with both their clinical psychiatrists and their counselors, and are being helped along the way, and are petitioning for their evaluations and are moving the way through. Those that are not participating are not requesting reevaluations, and therefore are not being reevaluated.
If that's a person who's got the wherewithal, the smarts, maybe the connections, the family, whatever, to do that petitioning process, which is pretty onerous, they're going to maybe move to the front of the line. They're going to get looked at. They're going to get the assessment. Say a person has low IQ, or they're depressed, or whatever the issue is, and they're not a person who pushes themselves to the front, that person can stay in there for many, many, many years without getting a review.
Do you think that this is another form of punishment?
Yes, it's another form of punishment for sure, in several ways. I mean, if you went out to Moose Lake, the facility that houses most of these people, most of these men, it would look very much like a prison to you, the facility there. It has double razor wire, it has sally port doors, it has security guards. The restrictiveness is like any high security prison. So in that sense, we are depriving people of their liberty the same way we do for people who've committed a crime, and that's punishment.
Coming up on Our Issues Twin Cities, the future of the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. Drew Shadeen's horrific murder in 2003 startled the public and alarmed politicians, leading to a crackdown in sex offender confinement in Minnesota. Since the controversy of the constitutionality of the Minnesota Sex Offender Program, the issue has become highly political. Why has it become so politically charged?
First of all, it's dealing with a subject, sexual violence, which we are all concerned about. Everybody is and ought to be concerned about it. In order to justify this use of pre-crime lockup, we've had to demonize the people who are locked up. That the minute you start then talking about possibly releasing somebody, it naturally calls to mind these scare tactics that have been used to justify locking people up, and understandably people get concerned.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way to parse out the politics and don't look at this as a red versus blue thing. We need to look at what are the recommendations. We have a population subset within the MSOP that are lower functioning adults or elderly adults at a diminished physical capacity. They may need and may deserve a different area to be in. One of the things that I've thrown out as a possible solution is looking at a less restrictive alternative on the campus of Moose Lake or St. Peter, but something that's more fitting to someone that physically is less likely to reoffend, and then someone that has a diminished mental capacity.
I don't think that would be a bad thing, but I think that proposal just distracts from a real proposal. They don't want to say we're doing nothing, we don't care, we're not going to do anything about this program. Sure. So they've made this proposal. That's okay, fine. I'm not against that. It doesn't solve the problem.
Today, this 20-some-year-old program costs taxpayers $120,000 per offender to house, feed, and treat each individual.
This is certainly a civil liberties issue. Anybody who's worried about their own freedom ought to be worried about what's happening in this situation. But it's also a very, very important issue about how we're using our state tax dollars. Why should we spend $120,000 a year to lock up someone who does not need that level of security in order to provide decent protection for the public? It's just a waste of money.
Ultimately, what changes do you think need to be made to the program itself?
Well, certainly we need more facilities where we can have different people with different kinds of risk who need different kinds of controls. Some may just need GPS tracking and to check in with somebody at night. Others may need a locked facility where they have a bit more freedom, but are under treatment and so on. We need different kinds of facilities across the state because there are sex offenders all across the state. They come from everywhere in the state. And so none of us should be able to say, not in my neighborhood, because we all have sex offenders in our neighborhood. And we do need a new system of getting people into the program where there's more consistency, where we make better decisions. It's not just yes, you're in or no, you're out, but looking at a person as an individual, because every one of these people is different.
What do you see happening with the upcoming ruling and how it's going to affect the state of Minnesota, especially since it is such an expensive program?
Rational thing for the state to do would be to begin in a very aggressive way to identify those individuals who can be placed in the community and to create those settings in the community to provide the kind of supervision in the community that would be necessary to transition those people into community settings.
And as many await the fate of MSOP, organizations such as MinCasa continue to work on the bigger picture, prevention.
If we really want to prevent sexual violence, don't we need to focus on those who are perpetrating sexual violence?
That should be the real question. We could be doing a lot better with the money we're spending if we stop focusing on, only these people and started to think about the full range of how we can be safer and how we can prevent sexual violence, how we can keep people from becoming victims in the first place.
Thank you for joining me this week on Our Issues Twin Cities. I'm Rana Kamal. See you next time.